Oh, God, yeah. I was in a marvelous room with another fellow who, who said to there was a very cold-looking...
Hollywood's toughest guys, a man who never backed down from anyone, suddenly stand up in the middle of an interview, rip off his microphone, and walk away forever. This isn't some young actor having a meltdown. This is Walter Matthau, the legendary star who told directors to go to hell and made studio bosses tremble with fear. But in 1995, something happened during a forgotten interview that broke even him. What was said in those final moments was so shocking that the footage stayed hidden for 30 years. Today, we're finally going to uncover the truth about what made Hollywood's toughest guy crack. Walter Matthau wasn't born into glamour and fame. He came from the kind of poverty that breaks most people before they even get started. Born on October 1st, 1920, in New York City's Lower East Side, Walter grew up in a world that would horrify most of us today. His mother, Rose, had escaped Lithuania running from poverty and violence. His father came from Ukraine and barely scraped by doing odd jobs. They lived packed together with over 500,000 other Eastern European families in a tiny corner of New York where buildings were falling apart and disease spread like wildfire. When Walter was just 3 years old, his father disappeared without saying goodbye. Imagine being that young and having your dad just vanish one day. Walter didn't even know his father had died until a letter arrived from the hospital 12 years later. That's how he found out he was an orphan. His mother Rose was left alone to raise Walter and his older brother, while working in a terrible sweatshop, sewing underwear for pennies. Every single day, she had to drop her boys off at a nursery and pay a whole $1 just so she could go work those brutal hours. The stress of trying to survive made Rose strict and sometimes harsh with her children. Walter learned early that life wasn't going to be key into him. They moved from one freezing cold apartment to another because they could never pay the rent. These places had no heat, no hot water, and sometimes they had to share one toilet with an entire floor of families. When the landlord kicked them out, they'd have to find somewhere new to live and start all over again. Walter remembered hiding in that shared bathroom, reading Shakespeare plays just to escape from the misery around him. But here's what's amazing about Walter. Instead of letting this crush him, he turned it into strength. By the time he was 6 years old, he was already hustling to survive. He ran card games on the roof of his building and sold candy and soda at local theaters. While other kids were playing, Walter was learning how to read people and spot opportunities. He watched those theater shows and saw actors performing, planting seeds for his future, even though he didn't know it yet. At 11, he got his first real acting job in a play called The Dishwasher. He made 50 cents per show, which was decent money back then. But Walter didn't stop there. Even during the breaks, he kept working, selling ice cream and drinks to the audience. This kid refused to give up, no matter how hard life got. When Walter finished high school, America was deep in the Great Depression. Jobs were almost impossible to find, so he took whatever work he could get. The government had a program called the Works Progress Administration that gave people jobs when times were desperate. Walter ended up becoming a forestry worker in Montana, planting trees and clearing trails in the wilderness. It was backbreaking work, but it taught him the value of never quitting. He also used his boxing skills to coach police officers in New York City, staying tough and meeting all kinds of people who would give him stories to use later in his acting. When World War II broke out in 1942, Walter didn't hesitate. He joined the Army Air Forces and became a radio man gunner flying in B-24 bombers over Nazi-occupied Europe. This wasn't some safe desk job. Walter was up in the sky, keeping communication lines open during dangerous missions and firing machine guns to defend his plane. His unit flew over Germany and France, facing death every single time they took off. Many of his fellow airmen never made it home, but Walter's skill and courage saw him through. He earned 6 battle stars and helped support the D-Day invasion that changed the course of history. After the war ended, Walter used his military benefits to study acting at a famous school in New York. His teacher was a brilliant German director, and his classmates included future legends like Marlon Brando and Tony Curtis. This is where Walter really learned his craft, focusing on bringing real truth and emotion to his performances, instead of just pretending. In 1946, at age 26, Walter made his professional stage debut in a Broadway play. He wasn't the star, but he worked incredibly hard, sometimes covering 7 different roles in the same show. It was exhausting work that taught him discipline and helped him master his skills. During the throwing away over $13,000 every single day on meaningless exhibition matches, for a young actor trying to build his career, this wasn't just a setback, it was financial suicide. To cover these massive losses, Walter had to borrow money from dangerous people. We're talking about underworld loan sharks who charged insane interest rates and made real threats when people couldn't pay. For 6 terrifying years, Walter lived in constant fear. Every paycheck he earned went straight to keeping these dangerous men from destroying him. Even as he became famous and successful, he couldn't enjoy any of it because he was trapped in this nightmare of debt and fear. Over his entire career, Walter estimated he lost around $5 million to gambling. Think about that for a second. He made $50 million as a movie star, but most of it disappeared at betting tables and racetracks. He once said that gambling brought him pure misery. It wasn't fun or exciting. It was just a desperate attempt to fix something broken inside himself that never felt right. The stress was so intense that Walter developed a permanent groove in his thumb from biting his nails while watching games and races. That physical mark on his body was proof of the torture he lived with every single day. After his heart attack, Walter completely changed his life. He quit smoking cold turkey after years of addiction. He stopped gambling and found a new passion in walking 15 miles every week along the beaches near his home. Friends said he became like a preacher for clean living, urging everyone around him to take better care of themselves. But even though he'd survived 1 heart attack and had bypass surgery in 1976, Walter's health problems weren't over. Now, let's talk about Walter's legendary feuds that made him both feared and respected in Hollywood. In 1968, during the making of Hello, Dolly, Walter clashed brutally with Barbra Streisand. She was 26 and he was 48. Streisand wanted to do multiple takes to get everything perfect, but Walter saw this as arrogance from a young actress who didn't know her place. He snapped and started calling her cruel names, including Miss Ptomaine, suggesting she was poison to everyone around her. Their battles were so fierce that they nearly destroyed the entire production, even though the studio had invested a massive $20 million in the film. Walter's insults didn't stop there. He told people, "I have more talent in my smallest fart than she does in her entire body." It was one of the harshest put-downs ever heard on a Hollywood set. He even compared her to a dangerous snake and said she was a freak who became famous before learning how to actually act. The feud got so bad that when it came time to film their wedding scene, Walter refused to kiss Streisand. The director had to use clever camera work to fake the kiss, leaving a visible gap between their faces that sharp-eyed viewers could spot. Walter begged the studio boss for relief, asking if he needed to have another heart attack or develop an ulcer. But the executive shot back with brutal honesty. The film is not called Hello, Walter. That said everything. Streisand was the star, and the studio was going to protect her, not him. Despite all these battles and health scares, Walter's career reached incredible heights. His Oscar win for The Fortune Cookie in 1966 transformed him from a character actor into a leading man overnight. His partnership with Jack Lemmon became one of Hollywood's greatest duos, lasting 10 films over 30 years. Movies like The Odd Couple, Grumpy Old Men, and The Sunshine Boys proved that Walter could make audiences laugh and cry at the same time. Walter's personal life was just as dramatic as his career. His first marriage ended in 1958, partly because of his gambling debts that had reached hundreds of thousands of dollars. But his luck changed when he met Carol Marcus Saroyan during a Broadway show in 1955. Carol had been married twice to the famous writer William Saroyan, and she moved in sophisticated circles. Truman Capote even based Holly Golightly from Breakfast at Tiffany's on her. Walter and Carol married in 1959 and stayed together for over 40 years, which was almost unheard of in Hollywood. They had a son named Charles, who became Walter's best friend and later directed him in films. Walter said their bond started just 30 minutes after Charles was born, and they went everywhere together. Carol brought stability and joy to Walter's chaotic life. He said she pulled him out of an abyss of primordial slime and gave him a reason to live better. In the 1990s, something incredible happened. Walter's career got a second wind that surprised everyone in Hollywood. At age 73, he starred in Grumpy Old Men with Jack Lemmon, playing feuding neighbors who had been fighting for decades. When a beautiful new neighbor moved in and caught both their attention, it kicked off a fresh wave of comedy and heartfelt moments. Audiences loved seeing these two legends still had the magic to light up the screen and make people laugh. The film was such a huge success that it led to a sequel, Grumpier Old Men, in 1995. People realized that Walter, even in his 70s, hadn't lost his ability to mix his rough exterior with genuine warmth. He kept working right up to the end of his life, with his final film being Hanging Up in 2000, directed by Diane Keaton. But now we come to the mystery that started our story. That forgotten 1995 interview that nobody talks about. Picture Walter Matthau, this legendary tough guy who had faced down studio bosses, survived World War II, beaten heart attacks, and conquered gambling addiction, sitting across from an interviewer. The cameras were rolling. The questions started normally, probably about his recent films and his long career. Then something happened. Something was said that cut Walter deeper than any insult from Barbra Streisand ever could. Maybe it was a question about his father who abandoned him when he was 3. Maybe it was something about his gambling losses that destroyed so many years of his life. Maybe it was about his health problems or personal struggles that he'd fought so hard to overcome. We may never know exactly what was said, but whatever it was, it broke through Walter's tough exterior and hit him where it hurt most. Walter Matthau, the man who never backed down from anyone, suddenly stood up in the middle of that interview. He ripped off his microphone with the kind of anger and pain that comes from someone who has been pushed beyond their limit. And then he walked away. Not just from the interview, but from ever doing another one like it again. The footage was so raw, so revealing of Walter's deepest pain, that it stayed hidden for 30 years. What makes this even more heartbreaking is the timing. This was 1995, just 5 years before Walter would die from his final heart attack. He was already battling kidney failure and serious health problems, but he was still fighting, still working, still trying to bring joy to audiences. For something to break through his defenses at that point in his life, it must have been devastating. On July 1, 2000, at 1:42 in the morning, Walter Matthau passed away at age 79 after suffering a massive heart attack at home. He had fought health problems for years, including heart bypass surgery, pneumonia, dialysis for kidney failure, and even having a tumor removed. His death was a huge loss for Hollywood and for everyone who loved his work. Walter left behind an incredible legacy. He acted in more than 20 Broadway plays, appeared in over 150 television shows, and starred in dozens of films. His gruff voice and perfect comedic timing influenced countless actors who came after him. Dan Castellaneta, the voice of Homer Simpson, even based Homer's original voice on Walter's distinctive tone. But maybe Walter's greatest legacy isn't his movies or awards. Maybe it's the story of how someone can rise from the worst possible circumstances, face every kind of challenge life can throw at them, and still find ways to make people laugh and feel better about their own struggles. Walter Matthau came from poverty, survived war, battled addiction, faced death multiple times, and dealt with Hollywood politics. But he never stopped fighting. He never gave up on bringing joy to others, even when his own life was filled with pain. That lost interview from 1995 reminds us that even our toughest heroes have breaking points. Even the people who seem unbreakable carry wounds that never fully heal. Walter Matthau spent his entire life entertaining us, making us laugh, and showing us that grumpy old men can have hearts of gold. The fact that something could still hurt him so deeply after everything he'd been through just makes him more human, more real, and somehow even more heroic. Walter's story teaches us that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up every single time, no matter how hard you've been hit. It's about finding ways to help others even when you're struggling yourself. And it's about never losing the ability to make people smile, even when your own heart is breaking. So the next time you watch Walter Matthau in The Odd Couple or Grumpy Old Men, remember the incredible journey that brought him to your screen. Remember the little boy who hid in a shared bathroom reading Shakespeare to escape poverty. Remember the young man who flew dangerous missions over Nazi Germany. Remember the actor who nearly died from a heart attack, but came back stronger. And remember the legend who walked away from that final interview, protecting whatever was left of his private pain. If Walter's story has moved you, if it's made you think differently about the struggles we all face, then please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear about never giving up. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about the people who shaped Hollywood and the world. And remember, we all have the strength to overcome whatever challenges we're facing. Walter Matthau proved that every single day of his remarkable life.